So hello, everybody. My name is India Viola. I will be your guide this evening. I don't know what I was going to say. And I have been teaching the basics of bicycle maintenance in the community of Madison for the past 17-ish years. And it's always a thrill. This is my third virtual class that I've taught and the first on this subject. So I feel like a learner, a beginner again, which is sort of fun and also always sort of terrifying. So what I will ask is just for introductions, I'll have Dar call on people. I don't know how to do it. And just so you can just say your name and how you heard about the class and one thing that you're interested in finding out about hubs, if there's a thing, and if there isn't, that is okay. We will hopefully by the end of the night you'll have something that you are walking away with that you found interesting. So, yeah. Actually, I'll just go from top down from who I see. I think I can do that. So. I have, and if I don't pronounce your name correctly, when you say it, then I will try to say it correctly. The other thing I want to say is throughout the class, feel free to either raise your hand and Dara can call on you, or because it's a small class, feel free to just unmute yourself and you can ask a question at any time. I'm happy to answer. This class goes from now until 8:30 p.m. I will be here until then and trying to answer anything that you want to know related to hubs. And if it goes too far afield, we'll see where we go.
If people are shy or have trouble unmuting, you can also type things in the
chat.
I think you can unmute yourself, but I'm going to unmute everybody because sometimes I feel like people have a hard time getting unmuted the first time. So I did unmute everybody, and then if you want to mute yourself after you introduce yourself, you can do that.
Sure. So we'll start with Allie Wenman.
Yep, you got it right.
Okay.
I heard about these bike classes through, I was actually an undergrad on campus a couple of years back when we were all actually on campus, so that's how I stuck with the center for a couple courses through there. I'm now back on campus as a graduate student, so excited to have this opportunity, at least virtually.
Yeah, great.
And then interested in hubs because my dad is an engineer and we've tried to fix a couple bikes, and that's actually been one piece that we are especially like, I have no idea what's inside of that.
Well, fun. So tonight you will all find out. Next is Atharva.
Hey, my name is Atharva. I'm a graduate student on campus. I heard about this class through the email that I got from Dar. And one thing I would like to learn about hubs is how to like open a hub with just one wrench, because I don't have two.
Bad news. But the good news is you can get two wrenches. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Danette. Thanks, Atharva. If Danette Muckamuller is there, they can go next, and if not, we'll head down the list and we can circle back. We have a couple of Johns in class tonight. So so the first John in the list is John Anderson.
Hello.
Hi.
India has always given wonderful explanations on how to do things, and I've had the pleasure of being in a couple of classes in the past, and I absolutely am looking forward to the hub demonstration tonight.
Great, thanks. glad to have you here. And next in the list, we have John Gaska.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Hi, I'm John Gaska. I'm academic staff at UW-Madison, and I'm interested in how to rebuild the hubs with what grease that you recommend and the tightness of springs, and I want to do it on my bikes this winter. And I've taken them apart before, but just want to be sure I'm doing it right. So,
Great.
appreciate your time and showing us how to do this.
You're welcome. Glad to be here. And we have a third John, and I don't know if you go by Jonathan or John, but it's Jonathan Doldy.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it's Doldy, so you got it right. And I actually go by Jim, so first of all. But I'm a graduate student right now with UW, and I was just checking the website to see if the shop was open, and then I saw the class online is how it sounded. And I think my main curiosity with free hubs is what determines the sound of each, because I hear a lot of different sounding hubs, so I didn't know what causes the sound or how the sound changes from one to another.
Cool. We will talk about that. We're not going to actually see the part. We're going to try to be making the parts of the hub that shouldn't make noise not make noise, and then the other part we will not see what's making the noise, but we can talk about what's making the noise and what might make different hubs make different noise for sure.
Great.
Great. 3 Johns, that's a record. And then Todd. So Todd may or may not be connected. We'll give one more.
And Danette didn't get a chance to introduce yourself.
Yeah. So if either Todd or Danette are able to.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Great.
I'm
Hi.
Danette, and I took the last class that I believe that you did on brakes.
Yep.
And I am just a relatively new bike enthusiast, and I know nothing about actually repairing anything.
Sure.
So I'm just sitting here watching you.
Cool. Fun. Thank you.
Thank you, by the way.
Thanks for, thank all of you for taking, this kind of sizable chunk out of your evening to join me here. So Todd, if you're able to connect, if you're not, you can say hi in the chat, or you can.
He's working on his mic, he said. So I think you can go on, and we can call him out at some later point.
Excellent. Okay, great. So getting started tonight. So usually what I'm doing.
Oh, okay, never mind. Go ahead.
Okay. So usually at this point, I'm handing things to people. So I'm not doing that, but I do have things sort of spread around me so I can grab at them. Okay, so what I'm going to first talk about is sort of what I'll give an overview of what we're going to do. So tonight we are going to be looking at a hub, and so this is an example, not quite there. This is an example of a wheel, and the hub is, and if you think of the word hub that's used in different ways in different, the hub of something is the center of something, and so that is exactly what it is in a bicycle wheel. The center of the bicycle wheel, and on a bicycle, actually, there's a part of the hub that stays still, that's clamped into the frame. I'm going to use some jargon, and you can just bear with me. So the front fork, either it's held in by the front fork on the front wheel, and then the wheels, and then there's an outer shell that we'll look at that spins around, and then the whole wheel spins around. And then in the back, it's held by the rear triangle in the back. The rear dropouts in the back. And so The hub of the wheel is the center of the wheel. It connects the spokes from the hub is connected from, the hub is connected to the rim of the wheel with spokes. And then on top of the rim, when we did our flat fix class, which you can go back and watch, or you could join me again in the future for, we get in sort of deep with the tire and tube and all of that and how to change a flat. But tonight we're going to focus in on the center of the wheel, and because this is sort of an awkward way to be teaching the class, the way that I choose to do it is to do it with the hub removed from the wheel. So this is a hub. This is a rear hub, and I think it was one of the Johns who talked about, and I don't know which words he used, but so the parts of the hub, we right now can see the outside of the hub. So we're going to talk about the outside of the hub first. Then we'll talk about, as we take the hub apart, we'll look at the inner workings of the hub. We'll take it all apart, lay pieces out, talk about what sort of how a hub is constructed. I'll put it back together, and then we'll talk about how it gets adjusted and what constitutes a good adjustment versus something that's out of adjustment. And then throughout that, I can take questions from you. So I'm going to lay that down for a moment and just grab a few other parts just to sort of get your mind, I'll use a pun, get your mind lubricated. So this is just this is a training wheel, and the reason why I have this as a prop is I'm going to spin it, and I'm going to have you sort of watch what it does, and perhaps, I don't know if my mic will pick up, but it's loud, it's wobbly, and it stops relatively soon because of the friction. So the hub is constructed so that if you were to pick a bike wheel up and spin it, I don't know that I'll be able to do this on camera. I might if I go sideways. If I spin it, I can spin it and spin it and spin it and spin it and spin it until we all get bored watching it and it's still spinning. And so it would just keep spinning for a few minutes. I'll stop that. And so what is the difference between the wheel on the training wheel and the wheel of the bicycle? And that's what we're going to kind of dive into. I'll give you the overview of the training wheel, because that is a simpler construction. So the training wheel is simply a plastic wheel that has a bolt running through it, and then there's a nut on the end of the bolt that's tightened on and clamped on, and so the bolt is acting as the axle of this wheel, and then the hub of this wheel, this is just a molded plastic wheel, and the hub is just part of the molded plastic that's running around the bolt. So the hub is integrated into this wheel and not fancy and doesn't run very well. And so if this training wheel were too tight, it would get so that the wheel wouldn't spin. It would bind up and wouldn't spin at all. There'd be too much friction between the bolt and the molded wheel. So it has to be too loose. There's no just right in this system. And so it does a lot of wobbling, makes a lot of noise, but training wheels are meant to be, they don't have to bear a lot of weight because they're just sort of outriggers to a normal bicycle wheel, and they're temporary. So the goal with the training wheel is that you learn how to not have to use them. And so these are not really built to last. They're not something you'd want to be relying on the way you would your bicycle wheel if you use your bicycle for transportation or recreation or both. So bike wheels are actually really nicely constructed, and so they spin much more smoothly than the training wheel and they don't wobble and they don't make that noise. And I'll give you kind of a preview as to why, but then we'll look at it and actually see. So instead of just a bolt being surrounded by a molded plastic hub and then having lots and lots of area of friction between the bolt and the hub. If you imagine this is the bolt and my hand is the hub, there's a lot of friction between my hand and the shaft of the screwdriver. And if I get too loose, then this would be real wobbly, and if I get too tight, it binds up. So the design of a bicycle hub is that there's actually a set of ball bearings nestled inside each side of the hub. And the ball bearings act like they're friction reducers. And so the axle of the hub, which I'm just going to try to get an axle. That would be a good thing for me to have. I think I probably have one that I can. Do I have one? Free. Well, we will see it when I take it apart. But so the axle of the hub is not actually rubbing on the outside of the hub. So I'll go right now. I'm going to talk about the anatomy of the outside of the hub. So this is, I'll start the other way. This is a hub for a front wheel, and it is symmetric. And so the hub has two sides. The spokes get laced through the holes in this is called the flange of the hub. It's like the brim on a hat. And it has holes drilled into it so that the spokes can go out and then go up to the rim. This is the hub shell that I'm actually holding, the metal, relatively lightweight metal shell. And then the parts that you can see from the outside is you can see the very ends of the axle on either side. So there's 3 or 4 threads of an axle right here, and it's just a long bolt that has threads on either end of it. Most of the threads are hidden. So what you see is a few threads on this side and a few threads on the other side. And then in from the threads, there's a nut that's called the lock nut, and we'll talk about the lock nut and what it does. And then in from there, there's another nut, which is very specialized, called a cone. And we'll see when I tear the hub apart why it's called a cone and what the cone does. And then on the end of the hub shell is just a dust, it's called a dust cap. And it's either metal or plastic, and it's a cap that keeps dirt and grime from getting inside and mucking up the moving parts of the hub, which we'll see when we get in there happen to be a set of ball bearings nestled in grease on either side. So a front hub is symmetrical, and so if you do this, it looks the same as if you do that. The hub that we're going to be looking at for most of tonight's class is a rear hub, and it is not symmetrical. So what you'll notice is on one side, it actually looks pretty similar to the front hub. So I'm holding on the free hub body. There's a flange on either end with holes drilled in for the spokes. And then on one end, and here, this is where I'll take out. So what's on the very outside of this hub is quick release, the clamp that holds the wheel onto the bicycle frame. So I'm actually going to take that out and set it aside for now because we do not need it. but what I do want to show when I do that, so I'm holding one side, removing a nut and a spring, and this is a cool spring that I talk about when I teach how to take wheels on and off. This spring is really cool because it's conical in shape, and when it compresses, it disappears into the nut. So when it compresses, you can't see when it compresses, you can't see the spring anymore. And then I can slip out the skewer, the quick release skewer, which is also just a bolt with the quick release mechanism handle on the one end that is used to clamp the bike wheel on the bike. And there's another spring on the other side. And the spring just helps auto center the quick release skewer on the wheel so that you're not having to do that manually when you're trying to take your wheels on and off. So that's a piece, that's a bolt, and that fit right through the center of the axle. So on bikes that have quick release mechanisms for taking the wheel on and off, the axle is actually a hollow bolt. For wheels that are called bolt-on wheels, which is a little bit of a misnomer, but some wheels that you use nuts to clamp the wheel onto the bicycle rather than a quick release, the axle will be solid all the way through because it doesn't need to be hollow. And it's a little bit heavier if it's solid and a little bit stronger. And so generally, with almost all parts on a bicycle, there is a sort of a push and a pull between strength and weight. And so as you get components, which just is another word for part, so as parts on the bike, in order to be stronger, sometimes they often have to be bulkier and weigh more, and to be lighter, oftentimes they will have holes drilled in them and be lighter weight. And when you get into ultra high-end components, so people who race either professionally or do really high performance riding and have the means to be replacing their parts all the time, they'll buy top of the line stuff which is almost disposable. It's so lightweight. So for the rest of us, we tend to have sort of sturdier, slightly heavier, but more reliable parts. So the hub I'm holding in my hand actually has some heft to it, and that is just because there's so many parts. So the axle is actually the part, so that clamp that I just took off, excuse me, the quick release skewer clamp is what helps compress and hold the wheel onto the bicycle. The axle has to be really strong for a couple reasons. And one is because it is what actually, the bike frame actually sits on top of this part of the axle. And it bears the weight of you and the bicycle and whatever load the bicycle is carrying. So axles are actually doing more work than you might think. So they have to be a nice sort of hefty sized rod. Before I keep going on, because this is just going to keep going and keep going, any questions at this point?
Todd, did you want to introduce yourself? Are you able to?
That'd be great. Yes.
I'm going to try unmuting you, Todd. You there, Todd? All right, well, he had a couple of questions. He wanted to mention that he works at the McBurney Disability Resource Center. He's curious about, is there anything different about the rear hub due to the cassette or the freewheel? any way to determine if the hub is worth rebuilding, and how often should a hub be rebuilt?
3 questions, okay. So the first question is, let's see if I can remember any of them, is can you tell the difference between a front and a rear wheel?
Yes.
Was that the first question? Yes, you can. So I haven't gotten there yet, but yes, so I forgot, like the reason I held up a front wheel is because it's symmetrical, and the reason I'm holding up a rear wheel is because it is not symmetrical. So this part of the rear hub is that I'm grabbing onto right now is not on the other side. So this part is special to a rear hub, and this is called a free hub body. And the free hub body is the part that on this type of hub is making a clicky, clicky, clicky sound, which I'm assuming is the sound that one of the participants. I'm gonna use my odds and say it was a Jonathan. You say it was a John. The click, click, click sound, but maybe it was Todd. I don't remember. Click, click, click sound is because inside of this free hub body, so this is what happens with this, and I'll just sort of show you, demonstrate. So there's a gear, the rear hub has gears. Those are downstairs. So there's a gear cluster that make up the rear gears on the bicycle that slides onto the rear hub. The free hub body has a set of splines on it, which are just alternating sets of like grooves and then parts that stick out, so that if something has matching splines that are kind of opposite, it can slide on and then grab on. And so the gears are on there, and then the chain is on the gears, and the person pedaling is pedaling and moving the front gears, which then drags the chain across the rear gears and then pulls the rear wheel with the gears that are here. And so you'll notice there's no clicking sound as I'm doing that. This is you pedaling forward on a bicycle and moving the rear wheel in the forward direction. And then when you stop, the rear wheel continues to spin, but the gears don't. They sit still, and they're sitting here, and the free hub body doesn't spin. And so the hub is spinning, and the free hub body is sitting still, and that makes the same noise as if you're pedaling backwards. So this is simulating pedaling backwards on a bike. This is simulating coasting on a bike, and this is simulating pedaling forward and driving the rear wheel forward with your effort. So the free hub body has to be able to move in one direction, be able to rotate freely in one. So the free is the free rotation in one direction, and then seize up and not move in the other direction. And there are little ratchets inside, very similar to a seatbelt mechanism. So you can, like, pull, if you pull hard enough on a seatbelt, a ratchet comes out and hits and won't go, and then when the ratchet lets go, you can let your seatbelt go. So in one instance, the ratchets are catching, and on the other instance, the ratchets are going click, 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 click over the mechanism inside the free hub body. This is a newer design, say like within the past 30-ish, 30 some odd, 40 years. Before there were free hub bodies, there were free wheels. And so what free wheel meant was, and all that means is that the free hub body was integrated into the rear gears. So the rear gears had a mechanism that allowed it to spin in one direction and move freely in the other direction. And the hub simply allowed the gears with the free wheel mechanism to slide on and actually be threaded on and attached. So the reason why bicycle manufacturers or bicycle part manufacturers went from not having the freewheel, which is where the gears and free hub body were one piece, and instead went to having the hub have the free hub body, is because your gears may need to be replaced when they wear out, and the free hub body is actually a costly, much more costly to replace a freewheel than it is simply to replace a set of gears. So the rear wheel, the rear hub on an older bike would either have a space for the freewheel to thread on, or it will have this free hub body, and that'll be on one side, the side that we call the drive side, which is the side of the bicycle that has all of the gears and the chain and the drive train, we call the drive train of the bicycle. So that's the answer to the first question, which I was trying to get to anyway. The second question had to do with how often. Can you remind me what the second question was?
Yeah, they're related. Is there a way to determine if the hub is worth rebuilding, and how often should you rebuild the hub?
Yeah, I'm going to table that question to after we take this apart and start putting it back together until we take it apart, because then I'll be able to explain the parts that wear out, why they wear out, how they would wear out, how you can prevent them from wearing out, and then that'll sort of answer as we go along. That'll sort of answer how often a hub might need to be rebuilt or replaced. So I appreciate those questions because they are good. Okay, so let's see. So we have axle. There's a lock nut here, which is just a narrow little nut. Then there are two washers that are just spacers. And then there is a cone that we can only see part of, that we'll see more of when we take this apart. And on the drive side, all we see is the free hub body, a lock nut, and the axle, because the other parts are hidden inside of the inside the free hub body, and we'll sort of see them exposed as we take this apart. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to unlock the lock nut on. I'm going to work on the non-drive side of the hub because I don't have access to the stuff that's on the drive side. So I'm going to unlock the lock nut. The lock nut is tightened up against the rest of the assembly, so I can't do it with one wrench. So that's sort of the, sorry to Atharva, but it's okay. So the tools that I'm using a 17mm box crescent wrench. So this is the box end, this is the crescent end. 17mm is pretty standard for the lock nut on hubs of bicycles. I say pretty standard because there's always exceptions. There are bicycles manufactured all over the world that have been manufactured over the course of many decades to centuries. And so I'm not going to claim that a 17mm wrench is going to get every lock nut that you see out there, but it's pretty much the standard lock nut wrench. And then for a rear hub, which is what we're working with, this is a tool you may or may not. So just by a raise of hands, who is familiar with, because I can see if you raise your hand, who's familiar with a, this is called a cone wrench. Who has seen a cone wrench before?
It's hard to know if you're testing their ability to raise their hand.
Yeah, right, sorry. So I don't know if everyone's screen is the same as mine, but under the participants, there's a green check mark, which means yes, a red X, which means no, and to the left of that, there's a little hand. That is how you raise your hand.
Yeah.
But that's okay. So right now I'm seeing one person with a raised hand, and I'll go with that. What's that, Dar?
And there was 2 X's.
Oh, and 2 X's, got it. So no, no, and yeah. So if you haven't, you can do an X or just leave your hand unraised. So yeah, so a cone wrench is a very bike specific tool. So a cone wrench, yeah, I'll just stop there. So this is sort of a shop grade cone wrench, which has kind of a long handle, a handle with a little bit of padding on it. And the features of a cone wrench, it's actually very much like a crescent wrench, except that when you look at it in profile, it's a lot skinnier. And the reason why it's a lot skinnier is because the nut that it has to go on only has a little bit of itself exposed. So,
hey Andy, I just want to warn you that I think your video is frozen, but we can still hear you.
I see that. Okay, let me see if I can. That's a bummer. I'm going to unplug it and plug it back in and hope it.
It could just be a glitch in the Wi-Fi.
Yep. All of a sudden, it seems to think that that was a. Where's the camera thing? How do you stop and start your video?
It's next to your name and the participant list. There's a camera.
It is. Yep.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. Maybe I'm back.
Yep.
Okay, we're back. All right.
Sweet.
Sorry about that. Thanks for telling me. Okay. So the this is the part that's like slightly challenging, I think, visually, but the top nut I can get to pretty easily, but the bottom nut is, I'm going to grab that screwdriver right here, is right here, and it only has 2 wrench flats on it. So the top nut is sort of a standard nut that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 6 different flats on it. So I could take a wrench and I could put a wrench here or here or here, you know, every X degrees. And the cone wrench, the wrench flats on the cone, which is why this is called a cone wrench because it goes onto the cone, is different, and they're only, so I can do it here, or I could go from the other side and do that here. So the wrench flats on the cone are so skinny that even if this were the correct size wrench, if this was a 15mm wrench and I was trying to put it on, I shouldn't do that because that gives you a false sense. If I had a 15mm wrench with me and I tried to slide it on right here, it wouldn't go on because it would bump into this spacer up here. So this is a specialized tool. Why? I don't know exactly why, but it is the way it is. So this, if you want to work on hubs, you do need to have a cone wrench. And for a rear hub, because rear hubs tend to be a little bit burlier and a little bit beefier, and so the parts are a little bit bigger. So the cone wrench on the rear hub is a 15mm cone wrench, and the cone wrench for a front hub is a 13mm cone wrench. And that's just something I know because I've used them. Okay, so what I'm going to do in order to loosen, so as what you'll see is if I were to try to just put this wrench on here and loosen it up, the whole axle just spins. It spins all the way from the top, from the bottom to the top. The whole assembly will just spin. So putting a wrench on here and trying to loosen this lock nut up isn't going to do me any good. So what I need to do is put a cone wrench on And what I'm doing is making it so that I can basically use this cone wrench as a proxy to make it so that I am like holding on with a lot of strength, a lot of grip, and a lot of oomph. I'm holding the whole axle assembly still with the cone wrench, and then I'm taking the regular wrench onto the lock nut. And what I am doing is I'm going to be, and I just was able to unlock it. If it was very tight, you might have seen me grimace or use a little bit more force, but it was tight. And so now this lock nut is loose. So I can now I can actually, if I spin it, there's sometimes still friction, and sometimes the whole axle assembly will still spin. So oftentimes what I do at this point is I go to the other side and I put a lock nut here and hold it steady. So I'm holding the whole assembly, and then I can just spin with my hand. So I'm taking the lock nut off. And what I do, so you can do this a few different ways, because there are 2 spacers on here, and there are different widths and they're supposed to go on in a certain order. And my brain is not the type of brain. I would put them down and I would immediately forget. So you can do a couple things. You can take a photograph, a digital photograph, and then refer to it. You can go on, get a bike manual, a bike mechanics maintenance manual, and look at it and look at how, but that might not tell you how your particular hub, how the spacers or washers are constructed. So what I do is I usually lay down a rag onto my work surface, just so that, because things tend to roll when they're on a smooth surface, but a rag is nice. And then I just take parts off, flip them over, and set them down in order, so that when I put them back, they just go back, and I know I feel confident with that. So I can take this off. This is a washer of a particular size. This is another spacer of a particular size, but it's a little narrower. Now I know how those go. And then now you can see more of the axle exposed. And then what I can do is twist. With my hands, I'm actually grabbing those wrench flats that I had with my cone wrench, and I'm holding the axle steady down here with this wrench on the lock nut on the other side. And I'm spinning, and I'm going to be exposing, and now I'm going to get grease. So if I were to be doing this for a living, or doing this more often, or doing this with more conscientiously, I would actually be wearing gloves. I'm not right now, just because I think it makes it a little harder to, I don't know, see. But I recommend, if you do this job, wear gloves. The grease that is inside of the bike parts is not just greasy, but it's also a petroleum product and quite toxic and not. So this takes a while to thread off. And this is sort of a fun piece that we will talk about more in a minute once I sort of show you the rest of the hub, parts of the hub. So this is called the cone. And the reason that I can figure out why it's called the cone is it has just a little bit of it has a conical, but it's actually a concave, conical profile to it at the top. And this is actually one of the surfaces that the ball bearings are contacting in the inside of one side of on each side of the hub, I should say. And then I'm going to take this all, if I were, yeah, I'm going to take this out for to illustrate what's going on. So the axle just came out. On the other side is still a lock nut and a washer that you may or may not be able to see. Everything's kind of greasy and shiny, and another cone, and those are still locked together on the axle in place. And I'm just going to leave them be. Set that down. So the next thing I have to do is, I had mentioned there's a dust cap. So there's this little flimsy piece of metal here that is protecting everything from dirt and grime. And it's just pressed in there, sort of like a paint can lid, just a press fit. And so what I use to get this off is as wide a screwdriver as you can get your hands on. This isn't really a terribly wide screwdriver, but it'll do the trick. This, when the dust caps are metal, they're really easy to deform by prying them up. So I'm just going to kind of like edge around gently and see if I can kind of get it with, this one's really kind of jammed in there, but see how we do. Go. So what I'm trying not to do is get it jammed or these have been used in a lot of classes with a lot of different people. So this might take me a minute. There we go. Starting to come. Okay. So I just pried the dust cap out without, if I deform it too much, it might not fit back in. So this is the dust cap. The other end is actually just still packed and filled with grease, which is fine. So if I were to be doing a very true overhaul of this hub, we are doing sort of a modified overhaul. What I would be doing is cleaning all of the parts. I would clean very thoroughly the conical shaped part of the cone. I would be cleaning that off and inspecting it for wear. And I will clean it off and see if I can. Dara, I'm going to ask you if you can actually see what I'm trying to show. You may or may not be able to tonight. But on this cone, there's actually a, let's see how close can I get without it. Nope, that way. Okay. There's a little shiny ring. I don't know that there's like a little shiny ring around, and that's where the ball bearings have been actually mostly making contact with the cone. And so that's the wear. That's metal on metal that have been grinding away on each other. And it's fine. If it's a nice concentric ring all the way around, this cone is fine. If it had lots of pits in it, which would look like little divots, like dirt had gotten in there and worn it away, and if it was very uneven, I might think about replacing the cone. So back in the day, you could replace every single part of a hub. You could go to Budget Bicycles and say, I need a cone for this hub, and they would look at it and they'd run to the back and grab you a cone. They still have some inventory, but I don't know how practical it is to do that anymore. But in theory, all of these pieces can be are separable and can be replaced. And so one of the parts on a bike hub, if it isn't well lubricated, meaning has enough grease or kept in great adjustment, and or kept if dirt let's see, if I'll do it in like all the negatives. So if dirt hasn't gotten in and there's been enough grease and things have been kept in good enough adjustment, then this could last in perpetuity. But if it's not kept in good adjustment, or dirt gets in there, or there isn't enough grease and the friction builds up, then wear can happen, both on the cone surface and then the other surface that the ball bearings are running in, and I will show you. what that is. That's funny. I think we're missing one in here because too many classes. So this, where's my computer? So this is, oh, did I just freeze again? Okay. Well, that's kind of a nice shot. So, yeah, okay. All right, I'll just keep it there, and then we'll just kind of like, if it comes back, you'll still be there. So what you're looking at right there is me holding the hub up, and what you're looking into is part of the hub that's called the cup, and it's actually sort of more like a bowl, but it's a concave surface that the ball bearings that are like little, they're BBs, they're little balls of a particular size. They are nestled inside of the cup, and they can roam they can spin freely in there. And then the cone goes in and can spin on those. And so the ball bearings, if you imagine if you were trying to move a really heavy piece of furniture across a nice shiny wood floor, and it was just you, and you were trying to push it, so just, my video is doing something weird, so I'll just try to be more like audio visual. So if you're trying to push a piece of furniture across the floor and you're by yourself and you're just like grunting and groaning and it's starting to tip instead of moving across the floor and you're having no luck at all, then if you imagine if you had the ability to put down a layer of marbles on the floor and then somehow magically lifted that very heavy piece of furniture up onto the marbles. So I'll just skip that step but pretend that happened. Then you can imagine, and those marbles stayed in place, you could then push the piece of furniture very easily across the floor on top of those marbles. And because the marble is only contacting the floor on one little point, and the piece on the bottom, and the piece of furniture on the top and the bottom, and because things are able to spin freely, the friction doesn't build up, the heat doesn't build up from the friction, and things are able to move and dissipate heat and not get melt or get aggravated in the way that metal does when it heats up too much. So, so the grease does two things inside of the hub. One is it it helps reduce friction. So things that are the ball bearings that are nestled in a really nice, not just a layer, but kind of like completely surrounded by grease. It cuts down on the friction between them, it lubricates the hub. And then the grease also is water repellent. So if water does get driven into the hub because you're riding through the rain, the grease will repel it enough so that it'll evaporate and not go in and gunk stuff up. So the ball, I hope that this clears up soon. So the ball bearings are
kind of try clicking on your video feed off and then back on, just on the icon.
Yeah. Do that. Good idea. About to go live. It gets better. Okay. I'll do that again if I need to. So then, so the ball bearings are sitting inside of the cup. There's a ring of them. The rule of thumb for ball bearings when they're nestled in something like this is that you pack them in until they're completely tight, and then you take one out. And so that magic number for rear hubs, and there's just a mnemonic that I learned way back and still use, and the mnemonic is the word 10, T-E-N, and it goes from the front of a bicycle to the back of a bicycle. So the front hub is the T. It has 10 ball bearings on each side of the hub. Then in the center of the bike is a piece that I'll show you later called a bottom bracket, which is where the center of the frame that also has rotational part that has ball bearings, and there are 11 ball bearings. If it has ball bearings, there are 11 ball bearings on each side. That's the E. And then in the rear hub is the N of TEN. So there are 9 ball bearings on each side of the rear hub. So there are not just ball bearings on this side nestled in a cup here, but there are also 9 ball bearings nestled inside of a cup here. And there is a cone on either side of the, if you remember, there's a cone on either side of the axle as well. So the axle actually doesn't touch the hub. The axle is, when you stick the axle through the hub, if I were nimble enough and I could like put it through here and show you, it's actually floating right through the center of the hub, and nothing makes, the gravity is pulling it down, so it's making contact. But in theory, when it's centered, nothing is making any contact until I'll flip it around, until it gets to the point where the cone is hitting the ball bearings and smushing them into the cup. And then you have to think of the whole thing as a big sandwich. So you've got the bread on this side is the lock nut, the washers, and the cone. And then you've got some meat, that's the, or let's go vegan. You've got some nice mushrooms in there inside of the, inside. And then you've got some nothing going on. And then you've got some more veggies. And then you've got the other piece of bread, which is the cone and the lock nut and the washers and lock nut. So a sandwich could be a very loose sandwich that you make, or it could be a tight sandwich that you make. It does not matter if you squish if you have a sandwich, let's turn it the way of a sandwich. It wouldn't matter if I were to squish the top piece of bread down or the bottom piece of bread up, as long as the other side stayed still. You're going to be tightening the sandwich. And I could loosen the sandwich by either raising the top piece of bread or raising the bottom piece of bread. So that's my analogy for the hub, for the way of thinking of tight or loose. So if a hub is too tight, meaning the whole sandwich is squished together too much, then things are going to be rough. They're going to bind up. They're not going to spin freely. There may or may not be any audible noise, but there certainly will be friction. And things are going to wear out prematurely because things are rubbing on each other too hard. So you've got the ball bearings squished between the cup and the cone on both sides, and they're like, so too tight, no good. Too loose, and things are going to be wiggling around. And so you're going to have ball bearings inside of, so a set of balls in there, basically, and all of the motion in a bike is, well, it's going up and down and forward, but really a lot of the motion on a bike is when you like pull on your brakes, you can imagine the bike's kind of going. So if this was too loose, you're going to have ball bearings knocking around. They're going to be punching in at the cups, and they're going to be punching onto the cone surfaces. And that is also going to wear things out prematurely. So we have sort of a Goldilocks scenario where you don't want things too tight, you don't want things too loose, you want them just right. Before I go on into like kind of putting things back together and then doing the adjustment, any questions about what we've talked about so far? And you can write them in the chat and Dar will yell them out at me, or you can just say them out loud, whatever you feel more comfortable with. I'm counting ball bearings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This one I think is 7, 8, 9. I think we have a. So something that does happen when you're taking, oh, we've got all of them. Okay, great. So if there weren't a whole lot of grease in here, and even sometimes when there is, when you take things apart that have ball bearings tend to fall out, never to be found again. It's fine. I am not doing this tonight because this is just for demo purposes and I'm not buying new parts. But if I were actually going through the trouble of taking my hub apart or another part of my bike that has ball bearings, what I would do is I would actually get rid of the ball bearings. You could clean them up and play with them if you want, but you can recycle them. You can, and then what I would do is I would take a nice clean rag, and the inside of a hub, inside of a part that has ball bearings is really meant to be very clean, because as I mentioned briefly before, if there's any dirt inside of the system, and grease is a wonderful dirt magnet. So if there's any dirt inside of this system, it is also going to wear out. It's going to wear into the cup, and it's going to wear into the cone as the ball bearing is grinding that dirt between those surfaces. So you want to have the inside of your hub really clean. So you'd use a clean rag. You'd wipe out the cup really well until it looks nice and shiny. You could check the cup surface inside to see if that looks really worn out. If the cup or the cone are really worn out, they can still be used, but preferably you would get a new cup or a new hub because you're never going to be able to get a great adjustment if the surfaces aren't smooth anymore. So that's sort of an answer, a quasi-answer to the second and third question of when might you want to replace a hub. That would be like, as far as the rotational parts, sometimes, yeah, if the free hub body went, which I don't think I've ever witnessed, that would be another time to replace a hub. So once I've wiped out the cup really well, then what I'm going to do is take, and I'm going to run into the other room because I realized I stole the grease that I use for classes to use in my life at home. So I'll be right back. So if you go to a bike shop, you might see they have like tubs of grease sitting around. That grease they use, but they do not use that for packing bearings. That grease they use for slapping onto seat posts and stems and threads on things that need to be tightened. But that grease doesn't stay clean. So the grease that you're going to want to use for inside of a hub is going to be clean grease, and the only way to maintain clean grease is to have it not be exposed to the outside world. So this is a tube of grease, and it stays clean because it's inside. This is a really old tube of grease. This is a poly lube. There are a bunch of different kinds of lube, and you can self-educate yourself on lube. But this is sort of like a generally higher grade, good grease to use inside of a hub. And it's just, I think you clip off the top with a strong scissors, and then it just squeezes out just like toothpaste would. And then what I would do is I would put like a new, I'm not really doing it right now, I'm putting a little on, but not what I would do. Yeah, I'll do what I would do. So what I would do is that nice brand new clean cup, I would put a ring of grease in. Then I would set my so I would buy new ball bearings. They're not expensive. And I would set 9 ball bearings in there. And if you forget the number, you can just pack them in and then take one out. And then I would put a new ribbon of grease on the outside to really kind of, like, you want to be taking up most of the space with grease. And then, and so, yeah, it's always like new ball bearings when you're overhauling a part of a bicycle. And then the next thing I would do is set that, and I would clean this has old grease in it, but I haven't ridden this hub, so it's pretty clean. This is the dust cap. I'm going to set that back on and sort of just push it on. And it actually just went on fine. And then the next thing I'm going to do is if we recall, I had not moved, and I would clean this all up. So I would clean the cone off, and I would re-lubricate the axle on the threads, and then I would leave the cone fresh because it's going to go into the grease that I've just applied. I'll put a little on this side. I didn't do that. So this would be much cleaner looking. And then I'm going to take this side, and before I put it in, what I would do, and I know this one is tight, but I want to make sure that one side of the assembly, and the reason I didn't take this completely off, which I could have, is because where the bike frame goes onto the bike is a very specific spacing for the bike frame, and it's symmetric. And so if I leave one side on, then all I have to do is tighten the other side down, and it's going to be in generally the right area, because when I talk about tightening and loosening the cones, the sandwich, the bread on the sandwich, it's going to be a quarter turn, an eighth of a turn, a half of a turn. So it's not going to throw off the spacing. So I leave one side on, and I'm going to poke that through, and it's going to grab a bunch of grease. So I'm going to wipe that off when it comes through. And I'd want to make sure that it didn't knock any ball bearings loose as I was threading that axle back through. And I didn't. And then I'm going to put things back on the way that they came off. So this is the cone. It's going back down. It's going to take me, remember it took me a while. And again, I'm going to, because things are now kind of slippery, I'm going to take my wrench and set it on the lock nut. If I'm not holding this here, it's going to fall down and ball bearings might possibly escape. So I'm going to hold that up with my finger, and I'm going to put that wrench on the lock nut. And I'm going to set it down just so then gravity, I don't have to hold too many things with one hand. And then it's going to take me a while, just as it took me a while to spin that cone off. I'm going to spin that cone back down, and eventually that conical surface is going to come up snug against, and I would want this to be really clean if I were doing it for real. Like little things hanging off. Spinning it down until I feel it make contact. And then once it makes contact, I'm going to stop. And then I'm going to take my spacer and put that down. I'm going to take my next spacer and put that down. And that just makes it so that the lock nut is in the right spot. And so I'm going to spin that on. It is not a bad idea to put a little bit of lubrication on any threads of that you're using, because what and it's grease generally that you're using. So, and the reason I'm doing this is that the grease takes up space, also repels water, which can carry dirt in with it too, but it takes up space and makes it so that I can actually get a little bit better feel and get it a little bit tighter without damaging things. So now I have everything just like really finger tight. And the part that in person is really, I think, useful to actually like do. And so I'm going to give you a very simple homework assignment after you leave this class, is to try to feel this on your bike the next time that you're with your bike, and I'll explain how to do that. We have 15 minutes left. So now what I'm doing is putting things all back together and also trying to make sure that this hub is in that perfect, not too tight, not too loose adjustment. I know that this lock nut is nice and tight against this cone down here, so I'm just going to leave that be. This lock nut is not yet locked tightly with the wrench against the this cone, which then has the spacers on it. So this is the side that I'm going to be doing all of my adjusting on because I have access to it. So I am going to, first what I have to do is sort of just get an initial read. So what I'm going to do is take my cone wrench, put it on the cone, and do the opposite of what I did before. So before what I did was I held my cone, and this does not matter if you're lefty or righty, you just have to follow these directions, and it just opposite. So you just have to follow. So when you're trying to loosen the lock nut, what I'm doing is holding my cone in my right hand, which looks like my left hand to you guys, maybe, but holding my cone wrench in the right hand, which is attached to the cone, and the 17 millimeter in my left hand, and that would be going in the lefty-loosey direction towards each other. So you're using a lot of force. And then in order to reverse that, I'm going to take the cone wrench and put it into my left hand. And then I'm going to be taking the crescent wrench into my right hand. And I don't know if you can see this, but every time that I'm doing this, so this would be this is an acute angle, smaller than 90 degrees. This would be a big angle. It is much easier for me for this sort of like scissoring effect to get a lot of good leverage when I make an acute angle and I'm pushing the two wrenches towards each other. Okay, so I'm going to then, oh yeah, wait a minute. Yeah, okay, let's see if this will work. Yeah, so now I am tightening the lock nut against the cone. So what I am doing is tightening the lock nut so that the cone stays in the position that it was, and I'm just locking whatever tightness this hub assembly was in. The adjusting is done with the cone. So when I spin it, what I can feel and what you have to just trust me on, I'm holding the hub shell, and I'm taking I can't hold the axle because it's like, but I'm holding everything that's firmly locked onto the axle, and I'm rocking it, trying to rock it like this. And if I can rock it, that means there's space in there. It means it's a little bit too loose. So you can't see it because my whole body's moving, but what I'm feeling is a click, 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 quite a bit of what we call play inside of the hub, meaning this is a little bit too loose. So I can't really tighten things as they are. What I need to do is loosen the lock nut a little bit, tighten the cone down, to tighten the sandwich, and then tighten this lock nut back onto the cone to make it so that things don't loosen up over time. So what I would do is go back to the cone wrench in the right hand. And so now it becomes a back and forth, little bit trial and error. Cone wrench in the right hand, lock nut loose. Now, in order to tighten the sandwich, in order to get the cone on this side tighten down further along the threads, if I just try to tighten it, what's going to happen is the whole entire axle is going to spin, and I'm not going to make any headway. So now what I need to do is basically grab the axle, and the easiest way for me to do that is to hold a wrench down here on the other side. And now when I'm using the cone wrench on I just can't see the wrench flaps because of the way the lighting is. So when I get the cone onto the cone wrench, sorry, flip it around. When I get the cone wrench, which is the tool, onto the cone, and I'm holding the axle steady with my hands, the axle's steady, and now I can move the nut around on that bolt, which is the axle. So I can tighten it, and I just hit like the bearings, or I can loosen them. What I wanted to do was tighten. And it's a pretty subtle maneuver. And then I'm going to do tightening the lock nut again. So I'm going to hold the cone steady, the axle steady with the cone wrench, and I'm going to tighten that lock nut down onto the cone. And do a little prayer. And now what I feel is it spins nice. So if it were too tight, it would feel a little gritty, because what would happen is the ball bearings, instead of really just like moving smoothly along one another as I spin, they would be kind of like crunch, 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 crunch. They'd be crushed. You wouldn't see it. You don't get to see wear on a ball bearing really ever, which is part of the reason why we dump them and don't try to put old ball bearings back in, because ball bearings get deformed into soccer ball shape, but you can't see it. And so it's a little clunk, 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 clunk feeling. What I would feel if this hub were too tight was that kind of like, it would feel like there was dirt in there, even if there wasn't. That would just be because there's too much friction. And then if I felt a lot of play, it would be too loose. So this one I actually, now here's the caveat. So sort of the perfect adjustment in theory would be not too tight, so everything spins really nicely, feels really like almost buttery feeling, spins really freely, and then no play whatsoever, and then you put the wheel into the bicycle, clamp it on, and the hub and the wheel just spin and spin and spin as long as they can, and that's the perfect adjustment. Caveat to that is that when it's a wheel that is held with a quick release mechanism, this clamp is actually like tightening a nut or a bolt like 4 or 5 full revolutions. It is a very strong clamp. It is going from loose to very tight. And so what happens is it actually ends up pushing on the sandwich a little bit and making the adjustment just a tad tighter. So for hubs that have the hollow axle and you have a quick release wheel attachment, the perfect adjustment is going to be a very, very slight amount of play, a very slight amount of wiggle room in there, really slight. It's a hair. If you have to err on the side of anything, err on no play and nice and smooth. If it's a bolt-on wheel, you want what I just said, no play, nice and smooth. So that's the adjustment. So if I weren't going to overhaul this hub, I did that as partly as a demo and partly to show you what was in there and to show how things can come apart, get cleaned out, and go back together. So that's basically overhauling the part. But if you wanted to just adjust a hub, you wouldn't have to take everything apart. What you could do is if you found that a hub was a little bit too tight or a little bit too loose, you could simply go and loosen up the lock nut, adjust the cone, and then tighten the lock nut up again. And that's a hub adjustment, which is a different animal than an overhaul, which is why when it's on a menu of a bike in a bike shop, an overhaul and an adjustment have really different price points because there's a lot more time and labor put into an overhaul.
You got about 6 minutes, India.
Okay, so we did it. Yeah, so my homework assignment for you, which I hate to even call it that because that sort of has negative, my fun task for you to do, should you accept the challenge, is to go to your bicycle when you next are with your bicycle. And I'm just going to talk while I'm going to turn my video off and on and see if that helps. Okay. And you're going to go to your bicycle and you're going to try to check the adjustment of your front hub. It's a little tricky to do when your wheel is in the bicycle. So you can do one of two things. If you are comfortable taking your wheel out of the bicycle, you can do that. So if you were to take, what's going on? We'll see if I can if I can explain this to you without you seeing me. I am better at this than I thought I was, but I think that might be what I have to do. Looks like my webcam just stopped talking to my computer. Okay, I'm going to try to explain this verbally, and then you could also go to YouTube and look up how to feel for a hub adjustment. But basically, you go to your bicycle, and you're going to be, what I was doing when I was checking is I was holding the hub shell and I was holding the axle. And those are two things you're not going to have access to when your bike wheel is on your bicycle. So you're going to use proxies for those. So in order to try to hold the hub shell, you are going to be holding onto the, you're going to be holding onto the top of the tire and holding onto the rim, like gripping your hand around the top of the tire and the rim. And that is going to be because if you remember in the very, very beginning, hub is attached through the spokes. And so I think we might be back in action. So you're going to grab your front wheel like so. And then what you're going to do, and because the spokes are attached to the hub and the rim is attached to the spokes, this is literally like grabbing the hub shell because it's attached and fixed and will tell you what the hub shell is feeling. And then instead of being able to grab onto the axle when the bike wheel is in the bike, you can't do this. What you can grab onto is the bike frame is clamped onto the axle. So you can grab onto your front fork with the other hand, and you can hold the front fork really steady, and then you can take the wheel and try to do this with the wheel while you're holding onto the fork. So you're holding onto the axle and you're holding onto the hub shell and you're trying to wiggle one in respect to the other. And if you feel a click, 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 click movement, that means you have a little bit of extra play in your hub. If you don't feel anything, that means your hub is in good adjustment or at least isn't too loose. And then the other thing is if you can, then you can lift the front end of your bicycle up and you can spin your wheel. And what you should see is what we saw on this wheel is that it just spins and spins and spins and spins and spins. If it did something more like what the training wheel did and it spun for 10 seconds and then stopped, that would give you an indication that things were either the grease was gone and things were binding up, or I lost my train of thought because my things are binding up, or the adjustment is too tight. So that's how you can check your hub adjustment. And you can do the same thing on your rear wheel by grabbing the top of the tire and then grabbing the frame, the part of the frame that's clamping onto the rear axle. We have a minute to go, and I'm going to take 30 seconds, and then I'll let you have well, let me see if people have questions. Yeah, that's a lot. Okay. That's okay. If the questions aren't coming to you yet. Somebody?
That was me, and I unmuted everybody just to double check.
Got it. So what I just wanted to show is there are other rotational parts of the bike that also use ball bearings to decrease the friction and are also constructed quite similarly to the hubs. The hubs are sort of I think the easiest, most instructive component to talk about ball bearings and how things can be tight and loose and taken apart and overhauled. But there are other parts of the bike that can be overhauled and taken apart and have ball bearings. So this is a bike, you have to use your imagination a little bit. This is the top of a fork, front wheel for a fork, and then this is the very front head tube of a bicycle, and then this would be the top tube coming out that goes to the seat. This would be the down tube that's going down to the bottom middle part of the bicycle. So this is called the headset. This is the steering column of the bicycle. So as this is turning, your handlebars would be on the top here and doing this, making this turn. And so there's something called a steerer. There's the hub shell is actually the frame of the bike here. Then the top of the fork has something called the steerer tube that goes up through the hub shell. That's the axle. And then there's a set of ball bearings here and a set of ball bearings here. And if you spit it on the side and do this, you can see it's sort of like a hub. And then the last part that I'll show you, this is the bottom bracket of a bicycle. It's inside the bottom. It's inside the very bottom middle of the bicycle, down by where you're pedaling, and it's also a rotational part. And so attached to here are the crank that has the chain rings on one side and no chain rings, and then the pedals. And so this spins as well, and it's what allows you to pedal. So there's the headset. This is called the bottom bracket, 2 hubs, and also each pedal. Those are the rotational parts of the bicycle, and all of them have bearings and are constructed quite similarly, have analogous parts. They have different names. We did it. So if people do have questions, Dar, I am happy for you to share. You can actually, if you want to just send, what would be the easiest place for people to send questions to?
You can send them to me. I can put my email in the chat.
Yep, that'd be great. So if you have questions that you didn't think of right now, because you're trying to integrate all of this information into your brain, feel free to send questions to me, and I am happy to field them as I am able. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
I'm muting everybody in case anybody had anything they wanted to say. Cool, thanks for coming, guys.